Welcome back, kids. It's Mr. Hull. Today we have something special for you guys. It's an extra credit assignment. We've been talking about the Great Depression, and on top of everything that was going on in the 1930s, the economic crash, the stock market crash, the banks losing people's savings, out there in the Great Plains there was a natural disaster. Actually, I shouldn't say natural because it was only partially natural, partially man-made. It was called the Dust Bowl. Now, you may have heard of some books that were written about this time period of Mice and Men, the Grapes of Wrath. But today, for you, we have a very special treat. It's, oh, what is that? Oh my God, whoa! Oh my God! That was a close one. My goodness. I tell you, it gets worse every year. The video is called Surviving the Dust Bowl, and I hope you guys enjoyed. There's some questions. Just watch the video, answer the questions. Very straightforward. If you got any issues, please send me a text, and I will see you guys soon.
Black blizzards, they were called. Dark clouds reaching miles into the sky, churning millions of tons of dirt into torrents of destruction.
We could see this low cloud bank, it looked like. You could see it all the way across. And we watched that thing, and it got closer. It seemed to kind of grow, you know, it was getting closer. The ends of it would seem to sweep around, and you felt like, you know, you were surrounded. Finally, it'd just close in on you, shut off all light. You couldn't see a thing.
And it kept getting worse and worse, and the wind blowing harder and harder, and kept getting darker and darker. The old house just vibrating like it's going to blow away. And I started trying to see my hand. I kept bringing my hand up closer and closer and closer and closer, and I finally touched the end of my nose and still couldn't see my hand. That's how black it was. A lot of people got out of the bed, got their children out of the bed, got down praying, thought that was it. They thought that was the end of the world.
Dust storms engulfed whole towns, ensnaring residents in a whirlwind of stinging, blinding dirt. Thousands would get sick from a mysterious illness. Scores would die.
When those dust storms blew and you were out in them, well, you spit out dirt. It looked like tobacco juice, only it was dirt.
When I'd see one of these black clouds rolling in, I remember thinking, why is it so dark? Why is it so dirty? What have I done now? What did we do to cause this?
In 1931, there was no better place to be a farmer than the Southern Plains. The rest of the nation was in the grip of the Great Depression. But in wheat country, they were reaping a record-breaking crop. Plains farmers had turned untamed prairie into one of the most prosperous regions in the country.
I came to Meade County, Kansas, fired with ambition to become a wheat farmer.
Lawrence Fobida had come from Nebraska's Corn Belt to start his own farm. He was one of those who believed he had found paradise.
Harvesting wheat was a thrill to me. The roar of the laboring motors and the whine of the combine was music to my ears. It was breathtaking. Hundreds of acres of wheat that were mine. To me, it was the most beautiful scene in all the world.
At the turn of the century, when settlers gazed upon the southern plains, they had looked out over a vast expanse of shrubs and grasses. The land was green and lush, and the soil so rich, an observer noted that it looked like chocolate where the plow turned the sod. The newcomers did not realize that they were witnessing only a brief moment in an endless cycle of rain and drought. Yet boosters and promoters lured in farmers with the promise of heaven on earth.
You have railroad companies and states putting out advertisements encouraging people to think of this land as a bountiful land. The state of Kansas put out posters showing watermelons the size of small automobiles, grapes the size of bowling balls, corn that you had to pick by going up a ladder. And people were encouraged to believe that this was the Garden of Eden. If they would only have the courage to go out and challenge the land.
Thousands of eager settlers took up the challenge, bringing farming techniques that had worked well in the north and east. Confident of rain, unmindful of wind, they plowed mile after mile of virgin sod. With the outbreak of World War I, Washington wanted wheat. Wheat would win the war. With record high prices, the promise of the land was coming true. Millions of acres of grassland would feel the plow for the first time. The race was on to turn every inch of the southern plains into profit. Appearing like giant armored bugs creeping along the horizon, tractors came to the fields in the 1920s. With a team of horses, a farmer could barely turn 3 acres of prairie sod in a day. With a tractor, he could plow 50. The great plow-up was underway.
So everybody got him a John Deere tractor or an old International and really went to plowing this country. And my dad was no different than the rest of them. You know, he'd run that thing all day, and when the sun went down, well, he'd come in and do the chores, and I'd go run that tractor till morning. Dad would work it in the daytime. He'd have everything serviced, plow greased, everything ready to go. When I got my turn, all I had to do was just get on there and drive that thing.
With so much bounty flowing from the southern plains, outsiders saw an opportunity to make a killing and began speculating on wheat. Suitcase farmers, they were called. Eastern bankers, businessmen, lawyers, who put in their seed and went home till harvest season.
They produce good. It looked like it's just a great thing that would never end. So they abused the land. They abused it something terrible. They raped it. They got everything out they could. And we don't think, except for ourselves, and it comes down to greed. You know, we're selfish and we want what we want, and we don't even think of what the end results might be.
I think that most of those people thought this is just what we might say hog heaven. It'll always be this way. So they kept breaking this country out. They plowed up a lot of country that should never have been plowed up. They got the whole country plowed up nearly. And that's about the time it turned off terribly dry.
Whirlwinds had always danced across the fields on hot, dry days. No one took much notice that these swirls of dust were growing thicker, taller, and faster than usual. Then, in the summer of 1931, the rains stopped, Wheat withered in the fields, leaving the land naked and vulnerable to the menacing winds. But no one was prepared for what was to come.
The winds unleashed their fury with a force beyond my wildest imagination. It blew continuously for 100 hours, and it seemed as if the whole surface of the earth would be blown away. As far as my eyes could see, my fields were completely bare.
As dust enveloped the atmosphere, it got into the eyes, the nose, the mouth. Breathing became difficult. The Red Cross issued an urgent call for dust masks, especially for children.
So we'd wear face masks in school and doing our work and so forth. It'd be a gauze mask and you could never seem to get a real good breath from that. And you often wondered, will I get enough oxygen to my system? Will this be damaging?
Residents grabbed any bits of cloth to cover their faces. The plains began to resemble a World War I battlefield, with dust rather than mustard gas fouling the air. Where grain once grew high as a man's shoulder, dazed farmers walked out over their beaten, blown-out fields. It had taken 1,000 years to build an inch of topsoil on the southern plains. It took only minutes for one good blow to sweep it all away.
Well, after a dirt storm, the ground would just be bare where it had blown all the topsoil away, and then it would be mounds over where the fence rows had been. So we didn't have much except just bare old hard ground. It was a bad time.
100 million acres of the southern plains were turning into a wasteland. A circle encompassing large sections of 5 states in the nation's heartland. The panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma, western Kansas, and the eastern portions of Colorado and New Mexico. A journalist traveling through the region called it the Dust Bowl.
The farmhouses looked terrible. The dust was deposited clear up to the windowsills in these farmhouses, cleared up to the windowsills. And even about half of the front door was blocked by this sand. And if people inside wanted to get out, they had to climb out to the window, get out with a shovel and shovel out the front door. And there was no longer any yard at all. There was not a green sprig, not a living thing of any kind, not even a field mouse, nothing.
Convinced that the storms were a freak accident, that the rains would soon return, residents could not imagine that they had entered a battle that would last a decade.
The next morning, they'd still have that dust settling in the air, but there would be the sunshine and all again, but then everything would just be covered in dirt. Everything was full of dust. If you were cooking a meal, you'd end up with dust in your food, and you would feel it in your teeth. You'd start to eat, and when you would drink water or something, you would grit down, and you always felt like you had grit between your teeth, you know. It felt terrible.
The next day, when Mother and my grandmother started cleaning out the house, they were taking the dirt out in buckets full. They were scooping it up onto wheat scoops, which are pretty good size scoops, and carrying it out into the yard.
The dust was just like face powder. It was so heavy and thick. It wasn't like sand. It was just real heavy, like face powder, only it was real dark, almost black.
To the astonishment of residents, the dust kept coming. In 1932, the Weather Bureau reported 14 dust storms. The next year, the number climbed to 38. People tried to protect themselves by hanging wet sheets in front of doorways and windows to filter the dirt. They stuffed window frames with gum tape and rags. But keeping the fine particles out was impossible. The dust permeated the tiniest cracks and crevices.